Hello, climate change fighters. I'm Val Vestille. I'm now in London and I'm flying back to the Philippines after covering the climate talks, also known as COP26 in Glasgow, Scotland. At COP26, Filipino advocates had high hopes to beat back the climate crisis. Their urgent ask: greater support as countries tackle emissions and adapt to a hotter world.
Concrete funding for adaptation, for the adaptation fund, for concrete funding for loss and damage. Really, those are all things that matter not just to the Philippines but to developing countries as a whole.
After nearly 2 weeks of dramatic negotiations on everything from limiting global warming to phasing out fossil fuels, world leaders strike a new deal on how to solve the climate crisis. They call it the Glasgow Climate Pact. COP26 mobilized public sector billions and private sector trillions. Developed countries made progress towards delivering the $100 billion climate finance goal to help developing countries adapt to climate change and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. 153 countries put forward new 2030 emission targets, securing near-global net zero commitments. This means moving away from coal power, reversing deforestation, and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. But further action is needed. Remember, if the world goes past 1.5 degrees of global warming, we'll see extreme heat waves, oceans rising, and dangerous weather events. Governments, businesses, and civil society need to work together to deliver on climate goals faster. And for this collaboration to succeed, communities should be involved.
Now that we're nearing the target na our temperature caps, it's so important to bring in people working in the grassroots, not just people who are in the high-level implementation, but also especially those who know what it's like to be on the ground and participate in the grassroots level.
The challenge now is how to translate Glasgow commitments into rapid action. Where? Back at home, where the real fight against climate change is happening now. Only then will the impact of COP26 be clear. See you soon, Philippines.
All right, magandang umaga sa inyong lahat. Good morning. I'm Ato Maraulio, your moderator for this conversation. Now, before we start, may I ask everyone to please share this live video on your social media pages, and also please invite your friends to join our conversation as well. So welcome to Usapang Klima, from Glasgow to the Barrio, a forum organized by Fight Media in collaboration with the British Embassy, Manila. The UK government hosted the 26th UN Climate Conference, or COP26. After 2 weeks of negotiations, COP26 ended on November 13, with nearly 200 countries signing the Glasgow Climate Pact. Today, we have invited resource speakers and reactors to tackle the Glasgow outcomes and what they mean to the country and our communities. To give us an overview of the COP26 outcomes and milestones, let's listen to Her Excellency Laura Boffis, British Ambassador to the Philippines.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much. Magandang umaga sa inyong lahat. As it's just been mentioned, I am Laura Boffis, the British Ambassador to the Philippines, and I'm absolutely delighted to be joining you today for this Usapang Klima from Glasgow to the Barrio. I'd like to begin by thanking our partner, COP26 climate defender Atom Arolo, and the entire Fight Media team for organizing what will be a really important and indeed a very timely conversation. Now, as you all know, COP26 was our moment of reckoning, the moment to get the world back on track to address the enormous threat of climate change. And 25,000 people from 197 countries, including 120 world leaders, came together in Glasgow. This is the biggest conference that the UK has ever hosted. And of course, doing this in COVID times was particularly challenging. But looking back at this, for me, the fundamental question is, did we collectively step up? Did we make enough progress? And looking forward, where should we be turning our attention now? So I'm absolutely thrilled that this morning we will be able to hear from Filipino delegates representing the government, civil society, youth, the media, who were at Glasgow themselves. Their views on what happened at COP26 and how we can further cascade climate awareness and inspire action at the local level among those who are already at the climate front line will be critical. So it's a real honor to have them with us today. Before turning to them, perhaps I can set out what progress we did make. As you know, after 13 days of rather intense negotiations, the COP concluded with every single party, namely 197 countries, agreeing the Glasgow Climate Pact. And this global agreement will accelerate the pace of climate action now. It is a significant step that sets major precedent, and let me tell you why. On mitigation in particular, over 90% of the world's GDP is now covered by net zero commitments. This was only 30% when the UK took over the presidency about a year ago. And while we know that NDCs do not yet add up to 1.5%, countries agreed to come back next year with renewed and strengthened mitigation commitments. This reduces the window for action and improvements to a year rather than 5 years, really accelerating progress and making sure that we keep the 1.5 degrees within reach. Beyond this, we were collectively able to secure agreement to move away from coal power, to halt and reverse deforestation, and to reduce methane emissions. And I'm really pleased in particular that the Philippines was able to support these international initiatives. Adaptation and loss and damage, which of course is particularly important here in the Philippines, was also a key priority. And developed countries agreed that by 2025, they will at least double finance for countries to adapt to the unavoidable consequences of climate change. A program was set up to come together and better invest adaptation. It's called the Glasgow Sharm el-Sheikh program. And there's also a new Glasgow dialogue on loss and damage. We did not get the loss and damage facility that I know many people were keen to get, but we are closer than ever, and in some ways closer than many participants thought we would be. The Philippines is, of course, a natural leader in this space, and I hope it will be able to play an active role in all of these discussions, including through the Sharm el-Sheikh program. I'm delighted from our perspective that the UK is able to support the development of a national adaptation plan of action through the Boston Consulting Group, because this will be really critical to set the vision for what long-term resilient development looks like in the Philippines. Finance, as you know, has always been a key priority for the UK presidency. Our ambition was to raise $100 billion a year. This will be met by 2023 at the latest, less early than we had hoped for, but we will be raising $500 billion of public money over the period 21 to 25. And critically, beyond public finance, we know that $130 trillion of private finance is now committed. The key for me going forward will be accessing that finance, making sure that all countries can draw on it to deliver on their clearly defined strategic long-term priorities. And a process is in place to facilitate that on access to finance, with Fiji leading that in particular. At the two-week conference, we've also seen increased collaboration between governments, businesses, and civil society to deliver on climate goals faster. There was a strong emphasis on this notion of faster, on this notion of doing things in the next few years and not shooting things further into the long grass. The Glasgow Pact further emphasizes the importance of human rights and collaboration across sectors in all parts of society to deliver what we call a just transition. Agreeing the pact was not an easy process, and certainly not one confined to the negotiating tables over those 2 weeks. As I'm sure you know, it is the culmination of tireless dialogues, artful diplomacy, and the voices of youth, academia, civil society, media, the private sector, and many of the people on this call. But of course, Glasgow Climate Pacts and the world leaders that signed up to it will be judged not on what was agreed, but on whether countries truly deliver on the commitments they made at COP26 and continue to grow in their ambition. This is essential for countries such as the Philippines that we do this and that we do this together. The UK government will continue to respond to that call for action and climate justice, and we will support the Philippines in particular on its climate commitments and priority. The UK's international climate finance has doubled to about £11.6 billion, which is approximately 745 billion pesos over the period 2021 to 2025. At COP, we further announced support to the region through a £110 million contribution to the ASEAN Catalytic Green Finance Facility managed by the Asian Development Bank. This will increase finance for green infrastructure in ASEAN countries. We also announced approximately 19 billion pesos in new funding for adaptation, which will strengthen climate resilience across the Indo-Pacific. And we launched a new urban climate action program of about 1 billion pesos, which will support developing cities and regions to transition to net zero by 2050. Quezon City is the first such city that is part of this program in the Philippines. Beyond this, we will continue to invest in adaptation and low carbon energy through existing programs, policy initiatives, and research in the Philippines. These are all contributing in practical ways to building adaptation and resilience, strengthening nature-based solutions, supporting a transition to clean energy, and mobilizing sustainable finance in the Philippines. And we will continue to support the Philippines in the development of a long-term climate strategy for resilient and low-carbon economic development. We will continue to use our Energy Transitional Climate and Council and the Climate Change and Environment Dialogue as key fora for the Philippines and the UK to come together with partners and make sure we continue to maintain the momentum. COP26 was an important milestone, but it is not the end of the UK's work. We will continue until we hand over the presidency to Egypt at COP27 at the end of 2022. As we take on the bigger and challenging role in operationalizing the commitments made in Glasgow, we hope to continue working with you to ensure a climate-resistant and sustainable planet. The hard work starts now. Maraming salamat sa inyong lahat.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for sharing the milestones of COP26. Certainly, some of them are very encouraging. And we have our panelists today to explain and to share with us their thoughts about what happened in Glasgow, Scotland. So joining us are participants from the recently concluded COP26. These Filipinos represent various stakeholders, including the government, civil society, and of course, the youth. The first one is Albert Magalang, the director for DENR's Climate Change Service. He'll talk about what the country committed to COP26. We also have Rodney Galicia, the national convener of Aksyon Klima Pilipinas, to represent the perspective of NGOs. So yeah, Rodney will show himself in a bit. And finally, we have Val Vestil, the executive director of the Association of Young Environmental Journalists, that will join us for his thoughts about youth and climate action. Now, each one of them will be given around 10 minutes, give or take, for their opening message. And we would like to start with Mr. Magalang.
Yes, thank you so much, Atom. Glad to see you online. Anyway, pleasant morning to everyone, especially to the very kind ambassador for joining us and also coordinating this event. Thank you so much. And also to our colleagues, to our partners, to our dedicated stakeholders in pursuing the climate action of the Philippines. So I was one of the members of the Philippine delegation to the 26th session of the Conference of Parties to the UNFCCC. So I was actually handling, or the lead negotiator for the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, which is part of the rule book that has yet to be completed. And we're so happy that at last, after 6 years in political and technical discussions, we were able to produce the rule book or the modalities, procedures, and guidelines in operationalizing the Paris Agreement. So a pleasant morning to all of you. Isang makakalikasang umaga po from the DNR. So perhaps what can first and foremost that I would like to share in terms of the unforgettable experience in terms of, especially in terms of climate actions, that as mentioned by the ambassador, having a meeting online or in face-to-face actual meeting, looking wherein you have the personal discussion with your colleagues, is a feeling. There's a feeling that we're really back on track after 2 years of meeting online. So it's really parang an accomplishment on our part to look at, to see each other, to discuss on a table and negotiate on the negotiating table, face to face, wherein we can easily have the discussion. There's a clear expression of our positions, including the body language, which is very important. So what we have really expected, I myself personally, as one of the Philippine delegation, is to look at the 4 goals of the COP presidency, which is one of the goals is to secure global net zero by mid-century, as mentioned by the ambassador, and also to adapt to protect communities and natural habitats, mobilize finance, and to work together to deliver and finalize the rule book. So, as I mentioned, I was negotiating or focusing my contribution, my efforts in the negotiations on goal number 4, which is to work together in order to finalize the Paris rulebook in terms of the detailed rules that would make the Paris Agreement operational, and also to accelerate action to tackle the climate crisis through collaboration, especially collaboration with stakeholders among governments, businesses, and civil society. So before I left for Glasgow, I was already expecting that, or I have already focused my plan of action on goal number 4, as I've mentioned. So we really I was expecting that goal number 4 is the most realistic expectation in order to finish up the rule book, and especially Article 6, decisions which are material for parties to work together on mitigation solutions, which would like to ensure that there is this cost-effective process, especially working on the specific market and non-market mechanisms. So, of course, we would like another expectation is also to deliver to provide this for COP26 to provide specific and concrete ways of working together with the rest of the developing countries, especially, so that we can obtain access to climate-friendly technologies, of course, the capacity development and financial resources for implementation as part of the means of implementation. So that's all for now, and I'll be back for further questions that you will raise. Thank you so much, Atom. Back to you.
Maraming salamat, Sir Val, for those updates.
Albert po. Albert.
Sorry, Sir Albert. I'm so sorry. Nandito lang ako. Si Val will be joining us later. Thank you so much, Sir Albert from the DNR Climate Change Service. At this point, I think we will be hearing from Rodney Galicia. I hope he's already here with us, the national convener for Action Klima Philippines. Hello, Rodney. Your thoughts?
Hi, yes, Atom. Yeah. Well, general thoughts. There are wins and there are losses as well, but I think the very good news for COP26 is that after the COVID-19, not really after, even during COVID-19 pandemic, uh, it happened. It happened. Sometimes we may be asking why is it that we need to go to COP26, and there are also um, uh, the hesitant decisions that we underwent, but then again, good thing that many delegates came. However, there are some complications when it comes to accessing some session halls, complications on accessing vaccines as well, and the limitations of travel going to Glasgow. Um, we were hopeful actually. However, the biggest challenge is how for us non-government organizations to directly engage ourselves in the negotiations, although there are some limited chances or opportunities. But I believe because of the limitation of access again to the Philippine delegation, we cannot actually negotiate directly in the halls, even in the plenaries. Uh, but we were again hopeful because we were able to talk and engage uh, informally with some of the delegation. I went there, and we went there not only as Action Klima, but there were about 7 or 8 non-government organizations represented, and more than 20 non-government organization representatives. We were expecting actually that our presence will be or our presence to be maximized by um, um, multi-sectoral engagement, but we were actually sad in some ways or the other that we were not able to engage formally with our official Philippine delegation. um, some key points, however, uh, we supported the the effort of the G77 plus China to come up and to push for the Glasgow loss and damage facility. But at the end of the day, it was not actually realized because we don't know. We all know that real negotiations happen not actually in the plenary or the session halls, but during break times and even informal conversations, like bilateral conversations of our delegation and even non-government organizations, and of course the negotiators. I think one win would be the mentioning of the fossil fuels in the Glasgow Climate Pact. When if I will be asked if the COP26 sessions, even the whole general conference of parties in Glasgow, uh, is it inclusive? Uh, the global south, uh, even the vulnerable countries coming from the global south, we're not actually fairly or equally represented due to the fact that we have a complicated issue in coming to the United Kingdom. Um, First, of course, it's so expensive. Second, due to virus. Third, in the case of the Philippines, uh, the whole process of coming up with positions, we were not really involved. But we believe that the whole process is not only within that two week period, but also before before the COP and after the COP. Say, for example, COP26 in Glasgow, but we need to prepare at least 1 year, or we need to engage in dialogue with the government and other stakeholders months before. And then after that, what would be. But generally speaking, the 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 success of COP26 may have to end in COP27. This is a whole process. As I've said, there are some wins and there are some losses, uh, but we believe that this is a whole process, and we will continue engaging in this whole process. Later on, perhaps during the question and answer, we'll be able to discuss further. But generally, for Action Klima Pilipinas, overall, we recognize that some landmark commitments have been made at COP26, especially when compared to recent climate negotiations. But until these words are turned into urgent, just, inclusive, and effective solutions, we have earned the right to be wary of these new promises. For Action Klima, we have seen it at the global and national levels. And the longer we delay meaningful climate action and the more time and resources we invest in false solutions, the more suffering vulnerable communities will continue to endure from climate change impacts. But ultimately, it will also cost our economy tremendous losses and damages that could only affect our pursuit of development. But and again, whether inside the conference halls or on the streets with thousands of others, we remain steadfast in our cause. We want climate justice. We demand finance for loss and damage. We call for global and local solidarity, and we demand higher ambition again, turn into concrete climate action, and we need them now. But kudos to the government of Scotland for allotting £2 million for loss and damage financing, and we hope that even if this small, the whole UK government, of course, should follow suit in financing at least every year loss and damage. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Rodney, veteran of these climate negotiations. Now we want to hear from one of our youth representatives at the COP26. We have Val Vestil, the executive director of the Association of Young Environmental Journalists. Hello, Val.
Hi, Atom. Thanks for having me. Magandang umaga sa inyong lahat na nanonood. It was my first ever COP, thanks to the support of Action Klima and Living Laudato Si. No? I was there, dalawa yung sinusuot kong cap. Medyo mahirap nga. I was doing video coverage of COP26 as part of my work with the Association of Young Environmental Journalists. And also, I was part of the civil society organization as AYEJ. The organization that we run is an environmental nonprofit as well. I came into COP, pumasok ako ng COP actually, na hindi masyadong madaming expectations. Kasi sabi nila, the greatest frustrations in life come from unmet expectations. So I went into COP without a lot of expectations. I wanted to temper my expectations. But the bare minimum of what I was looking forward to was, number one, to speak formally with our official party delegates, and number two, to actually sit and observe in the meeting rooms where the negotiations had occurred. And I think it's safe to say that neither of those happened for me personally. And I think I share my sentiment with a lot of Filipinos who I talked to, because I was doing a lot of interviews left and right. This is not just an opinion of mine, it's what happened during COP26. Many Filipinos had sacrificed their time, their effort, and their energy and resources to fly to COP26 with the desire of speaking with our party delegates, being actively involved in the negotiations, just as observers even, but it was not met. With my media cap on, since I was, not given access to the negotiations, or at least formally speak with our official party delegates of the Philippine government, I decided to speak instead with young people and CSO representatives who were outside the negotiation rooms, where I believe more power exists. It's ironic that the most powerful people in this climate movement, who are young people and CSO representatives who really carry the stories of those affected by the climate crisis, are left outside of the negotiation rooms. And that is disappointing, to say the least. The thoughts that I share in this opening message do not come from me, but this is sort of a combination, halo-halo na sa lahat ng mga sinasabi ng mga kabataan na kinausap ko. I spoke to at least 5 young Filipinos who were present in COP26, and I was speaking to young people from Fiji, from Mozambique, from India, from Ireland. I was speaking to people across all levels because sabi ko, since my own government is not speaking to me while I was at COP, fine, let's speak to the people who matter for me. And those are young people and climate activists and CSO representatives. I spoke with Marinel Ubaldo, who was a survivor of Typhoon Haiyan. I spoke with Christ Godino, who is a climate activist. I spoke with Jeff Estella, who focused on loss and damage as a young person in COP26. I spoke with John Leo Algo, who is a climate change communicator and scientist. I spoke with John Bonifacio, who is a founder of the Youth Advocates, of YAKAP Philippines. I spoke with all these voices, and I spoke with them different times of the day. I asked them different questions. I asked them from different places around Scotland and even London. But it all weaved together the same voice of disappointment. So that doesn't come from me. That comes from at least 5 of the people that I spoke with, 5 of the young voices that I spoke with. They all said in unison, nandito kami sa labas. Nandito kami sa climate strikes dahil hindi kami binigyan ng mabuting at maganda at importanteng access in the negotiation rooms. They felt left out. They felt excluded. I was speaking with one CSO representative and she said, I don't know if it was my ignorance. I don't know if it was my naivety where I expected that I would be actively involved in COP26, but here I am, not day 5, not knowing what to do. I'm para siyang ligaw na manok or something like that. And it really yan yung mga opinion na lumitaw. Yes, there have been wins as shared by the panelists that came before me. They had the Glasgow Climate Pact talk about ending deforestation by 2030, 30% methane cuts by 2030, even though not 100 countries voted for that. But the wins came with losses as well that I think we need to speak frankly about, and it's engaging with young people. It's in our climate act in the Philippines, importante na kausapin din natin ang mga stakeholders as we go into the negotiation tables, and for the actual Filipinos and young people who were there and had access inside COP26, hindi yun nangyari. And later on in our conversations, I can speak more about the thoughts of Marinel, of Christ, of Jeff, of JL, of John, bilang I represent their voices in this conversation for this morning. To end my opening message, and I think I've said this before, ang nangyari sa COP26, since it was my first time, it was an overwhelming event with underwhelming outcomes. It was supposed to be a follow-on to the Paris Agreement, which happened 5 years ago, and COP26 ended with just more and more commitments on paper that we hope to achieve in the next 10 years. And we're running out of time, and I don't know why we're still at that place right now. That would be all. Salamat.
Thank you so much, Val. Very important observations, and of course, the perspective of somebody on the ground, especially representing the youth, is very important. Let's unpack this further. I'd like to ask questions from our panelists at this point. Balikan ko lang si Director Albert bilang representative ng ating gobyerno. There are, of course, many commitments that we can talk about when it comes to the Glasgow Climate Pact, mga NDAs natin, no? Pero I'd like to be specific already with our commitments when it comes to coal. Siguro, Director Albert, can we talk about how the Philippines, or first of all, ano ba yung commitment ng Filipinas when it comes to coal power with the use of coal? And how do we plan to achieve our commitments?
Yes, thank you so much, Atom. Actually, yung question nito is for the Department of Energy, but but I'll try to to
Yes,
answer your
yeah, kahit ano lang, general overview lang, sir.
sure. Sure, ikaw pa eh. Anyway, Atom and colleagues, I'm reminded of the moratorium that was endorsed or actually na-issue ng Department of Energy, moratorium on the endorsement of greenfield coal power plants, wherein the Department of Energy has decided to stop the endorsements of coal plants, especially the new coal power plants, dahil nagkaroon ng assessment that showed yung importance ng to focus our yung ating energy sources to a more flexible power supply mix. Yun ang yun ang as far as I remember. In fact, there was also a statement from Undersecretary Wimpy Cantavilla that the Philippines would need to prepare for the yung pag for the renewable energy sources that will be coming in under the recent policies issued by the DOE, which is this moratorium nga. So dapat maging flexible tayo, according to him. So now the Philippines, na tama-tama naman na in aligned with one of the decisions of COP26, na kung saan we have to look at Rodney has mentioned about the phasing down of coal, as well as looking at the phasing out of yung mga subsidies na dapat qualified pa rin. Especially yung sinasabing inefficient fossil fuel subsidies that need to be elaborated later or defined among parties. So, yun nga, in connection with the COP decision on coal, so the Philippines now have to consider kung paano i-accelerate yung efforts towards a phase down of unabated coal power. In fact, I'm looking at, itong phasing down na to, it's not something new for the Philippines, especially if you have to look at the way we handle the ozone depleting substances. Actually, okay lang na phase down kasi para to give us also time, especially for the Philippines, na mag-adapt to this changes ng ating power supply. Mahirap din kasi yung abrupt eh. Especially kung may implication to sa ating power energy security. Are we ready? In fact, I've also asked other yung previous former negotiators na wala namang pagkakaiba yung phase up at phase down eh. Actually, ang naman dyan is magpa-phase out naman talaga yan subsequently. But we have to we have to prepare ourselves, especially yung sinasabi nating just transition. Now, sana itong mga transition na to will not create poverty or will not create inconvenience to all of us. So, I really I'm one of those who tao dito, who did not in a way express great concern on how to use the phase out or the phase down terminology sa COP decision. Both are acceptable. Yun nga lang, we really have to again sit down with our colleagues sa yung mga parties to the UNFCCC kung paano i-elaborate itong decision na to on phase out and phase down sa decision. So far, that's in a nutshell, yan lang ang pwede kong i-share, Atom, as regards to my knowledge as regards to the yung tawag dito, yung energy transition that the country plans to pursue. Back to you, Atom. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Director Albert. Puntahan natin si Rodney. Of course, this is only one part of the conversation, maybe not even the most important part when it comes to the Philippines, yung mitigation. And we'd like to talk about the adaptation later on. Pero, Rodney, siguro kanina na-share mo na yung level of satisfaction when it comes to the COP26, which is kind of mixed. But in terms of the commitments of the national government, talking about energy transition, if you want to comment about that, what do you think about the plan of the government to phase out or phase down coal? Are we doing it fast enough? And what do you think about the other commitments of the Philippine government?
There are two kinds of commitments actually. The commitment outside the decision, and the commitment signed uh, through other efforts, efforts of other governments, of other state parties. When we talk about the official decision, the Glasgow Climate Pact, a new similarity? I think the similarity would be the word unabated. If we talk
Mm,
about unabated, facing down, or and then climate financing, and stopping unabated. What's unabated coal? We
mm,
need to define that one, because in the negotiations, Sir Albert knows it, that every, even colon or semicolon or period, or even the word is very, very important. If we say unabated, uh, to abate is to reduce, in
mm,
degree or intensity. So abatement is perhaps an effort or a process of reducing. So if we say coal, abated coal, you have the technology in your existing in your existing power plant that is already, this is lesser carbon. The emission is lesser. So if we say phasing out unabated coal, we actually do away with the plants without those technologies, among other things. But I think,
Minimum.
considering the fact that there's this coal moratorium last year or 2 years ago, that was last year, Sir Albert, no, and there's this agreement signed by the Philippines. I actually consider this not signing, because there are four points, four agreements in this, what we call, global climate agreement, that actually signed in points two and number three. Number two is to rapidly scale up technologies and policies in this decade to achieve a transition away from unabated coal power generation in
Mm,
2030s. So we did not sign on this point. Point number three, so two and three, to cease issuance of new permits for new unabated coal-fired power generation projects, and even the financing. So it seems that the government is not serious in their coal moratorium, and then we have this new agreement that they signed up half baked. But then again, there's this Philippine Energy Plan, and we need to look more deeply on this, on how to implement the Philippine Energy Plan. Is this plan really inclusive? When this plan was formulated from the bottom up, from the grassroots level, because as far as I'm concerned, being with the Provincial Development Council of Romblon, and being the chair of the Economic Development Committee of the Mimaropa and Regional Development Council, we were not included, or we did not join, as far as I know, about this process, because we see, specifically for energy and for NDC, the government see this as an investment mechanism, investment strategy for now and for the future. So I think this is a development issue, and we still have, I think, nine years for sustain SDG when it comes to energy. And with this kind of commitment, I think we will not achieve sustainable development goal on efficient and sustainable energy.
all right. Thank you, Rodney. Val, how important is it for you to see these NDCs from the Philippine government? And what did you think about our commitments as far as mitigation is concerned? Val, I think you're on mute.
Sorry. Yeah. There
Right.
was a
Go ahead.
time when we were still on our way to COP26, no, and I'm glad to have conversations with Sir Albert as well with the government side, and I really appreciate Sir Albert really making time for me. It was one of our informal conversations. Madaming tanong sa mga kaibigan ko among the network. Ano ba talaga yung NDCs ng Pilipinas? Ano yung final number? And at that point, there was a point na hindi pa masyadong klaro, and there was a lot of push and pull with the commitment of the Philippines. And then we finally knew about the NDCs. It's important that we know about the commitments of um, it's important that young people know about the commitments of the Philippine government in terms of NDCs so that young people can hold governments accountable, can hold our government accountable for the NDCs that were expressed and negotiated on at COP26. Again, pagod ng mga kabataan sa mga commitment, sa mga hanggang commitment lang. Ako, marunong ako mag-commit ng long term, char. Pero hindi, yung mga kabataan, parang we are so it's falling on deaf ears now. The promises, and especially that the elections are coming in, the campaign promises, the commitments, the big and bright, bold numbers that have been set for us, we're tired of listening to it. We want to see action. And Sir Albert mentioned kanina na medyo mahirap nga at matagal yung just transition to clean energy, and we recognize that, but how long have we been in that conversation of saying yes, matagal nga, yes, mahirap nga, and vis-a-vis to our NDCs and commitments at the national scale, we come from the global south. And there was a lot of conversation sa COP26 na it's global north versus global south. It's the global north who should give their solid commitments for developing countries like ours. So hindi ko naman talaga sinasabi na lahat ng accountability ay nasa Philippine government lang. May accountability din sa mga signed parties to the Climate Pact, sa mga signed parties to the Paris Agreement na you have your commitments for developing countries like the Philippines. And if you want to help us out, reach our NDCs, commit to our NDCs, you should also do your part as the global north, as developed countries. Kasi may ganung relationship which I found out more about when I went into COP26. So as young people, it's important for us to really know about these because we want to hold our Philippine government accountable, and at the same time, we want to hold signed parties to the agreements accountable as well. Na at the end of the day, we do not want to antagonize government. We want to work together. Kasi isa sa mga goals ng isa sa mga goals ng COP26 ay collaboration, working together. That's why I don't see, and we should not see the party delegate as the enemy or the global north as the enemy. But we should find the integration of our work to work together, to continue working together to really achieve the outcomes and outputs expected from COP26.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Val. Actually, COP21 pa lang pinag-uusapan na yan. Ano? So parang 5 years later, sometimes you have to ask, no? Parang, are we going around in circles? Of course, we have to be optimistic. We're seeing the important milestones of COP26. But like everybody acknowledges, we have to do more. Para lang sa mga naka-tune in, just to define what the global south is, baka hindi ganun ka-familiar. It's just a general grouping of countries that are part of so-called lower income countries, where the Philippines is part of. Kasi geographically speaking, we are actually north of the equator. Sometimes it's confusing. Of course, going back to Director Albert, sir, isa sa mga naging focus ni Finance Secretary Carlos Dominguez III is what he calls champion climate finance and climate justice at COP26. Moving on from mitigation to adaptation, what are the top 3 adaptation strategies that should be prioritized by the Philippines as one of the most vulnerable and one of the most affected by the climate crisis?
Yes, thank you, Atom, for raising some concerns about finance. Kasi as the Philippines has expressed in one of as one of its priority areas doon sa COP26, yung finance nga. In fact, Secretary Dominguez, as the head of the delegation, has reiterated to us, Philippine delegation, during our regular meeting, regular meeting sa Glasgow, that the Philippines would really champion climate finance and climate justice at COP26. Actually, before that, talagang the Philippines has already been respected or recognized by countries, kasi the Philippines has been yung lead or the lead coordinator or negotiator ng G77 in China in terms of finance. Meron tayong Green Climate Fund na nag-evolve, and then also the 100 billion promise or commitments ng mga developed countries under the Paris Agreement. Puro yan ng Pilipinas. When our negotiator si Dita Smuller was still with us. So talagang kilala ang Pilipinas on the financial, concerns about finance, negotiations about finance sa mga different COPs. And then yun nga, as emphasized by the head of the delegation, na may mga areas of climate action that should be covered doon sa kanyang advocacy sa COP26. Like for example, the Philippines was looking at climate finance taking a blended approach. Like for example, grants, investments, and subsidies. Pero we're not it doesn't mean na kakalimutan or we have to set aside our advocacies or yung we are negotiating hard sa climate finance until we have really attained that or achieved what we really need to acquire that or to directly access finance as one of the support that we're committed or promised. Yung sinasabi ni Val na some commitments na naman ng developed countries to us. So, kaso nga, it will take time. In fact, even the 100 billion US dollars promise or commitment under the Paris Agreement has yet to be realized. Kaya the Philippines Philippines has identified other options, like to look at these three areas on grants, investments, and subsidies. There were several bilateral meetings that the Department of Finance and even the Department of Energy have had with investors at COP26. So ang focus is to look at grants. Kahit na through bilateral means, kasi ang hirap talaga ng multilateral process, that will take time. So kung pwede, at ako na muna, parang magkikibot one-on-one muna ang Pilipinas with especially doon sa mga multilateral development banks and other development partners who are willing to invest. In fact, marami na sila na dito. They're already here, having an initial talks with us on what kind of investments the Philippines would need and also subsidies. So we have to focus on how to finance or to support our NDC. We have government agencies have already identified the policies and measures that will be part of our commitment under the nationally determined contribution of Pilipinas, and we need now to work on the conditional. The conditional commitments. Kasi sabi nga natin, it really depends on what kind of support we're going to access from development partners or from developed countries para masuportahan yung ating yung ating commitments. Kaya we have this conditional NDC as part of our overall plan. Pero talking about NDC, there's and mitigation. There's also the need to revisit once again our NDC to look at the especially we were advocating for emissions avoidance done sa COP26. So we have to look at measures on how to leapfrog to low emitting technologies or how to acquire this non-emitting technologies na kung saan ay we can we can attain or achieve our commitments under the NDC. And adaptation, of course, is our priority. Kaya nga, kaso nga, NDC is really mitigation centric. Hindi kasi more on NDC would always address the long-term goal of the Paris Agreement, which is sinasabi natin to maintain the 1.5 degrees temperature limit. So talagang mitigation centric. But on the adaptation, we have to work on that. Kaya there's one of the decisions ng COP26 is to urging the country parties to work on their national adaptation plans. So I think this will be a good, opportunity for the civil society organizations. Now that we have also a decision on collaboration, now we're in even the youth, the young people's contribution have already been addressed na sa COP26 decision, especially the important role of non-party stakeholders. So we have now simulan natin. We have to start with dealing with the National Action Plan, wherein we can also put in place na or to operationalize yung decision on collaboration with non-party stakeholders, with the youth, and ensuring youth participation, as well as sinasabi na nilang observer organizations. So we hope that we can be more transparent or be more engaging with the non-party stakeholders doon sa formulation ng ating adaptation plan. So we have to focus on that kasi sabi nga sa COP26 decision, again, may mga commitment or promises to support developing countries in formulating their national adaptation plans. Back to you, Tom. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Albert. Okay, we are at the 1 hour mark. We'll take a short break muna para lang makapag-unat-unat yung ating mga panelists and also, maybe have a drink of water. We will be restarting the panel discussion in around 5 minutes. So please stay tuned. Yung mga panelists natin, sit tight. We'll be back soon.